Let's talk.
Jochen Brown.
There is no mystery more compelling than the disappearance of British mountaineer George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, last seen going strong for the top of Mount Everest on the 8th of June, 1924. They disappeared. It was until about 25 years ago one of the great mysteries of what had happened. However, Julie Summers and Jochen Hammleb have explored this in a new book called The Everest Mystery, and I'm glad to say that they join us not halfway up the North Face or, hanging from a precipice in the Matterhorn, but very much with us live in the studios at TRE. Well, not live in the studios, but live with us on TRE. Julie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles. Lovely to be here.
And Jochen, good morning to you too, my friend. He's waving.
Nice to
there we go. That you see, waving on the radio tends to be a bit of a. But good to have you with us, Julie. Explain to me a little bit about your personal connection before we come on to exactly who these men were and what mountaineering was like in 1920s.
Right. So Sandy Irvine was my great uncle. His older sister, Evelyn, was my grandmother Summers. And I first found out about Sandy Irvine's story when I was 7. My father told me the story of this extraordinary young man who'd gone into the mountains and died on Everest in 1924. And he was sort of this mythically romantic figure in the family. And yet he was so important to the family that nobody would talk about him in public. So my grandmother refused ever to have his name mentioned in her presence because she was so sad after he died. So he really was a mythical creature. And it was only when I was in my 20s that I understood sort of more about what he and George Mallory had achieved. And then as my life has gone on, I've ended up by writing about him and studying his world and finding him endlessly fascinating.
Because it's always been a thing, hasn't it, that people have argued that Mallory was, decades, almost 3 decades before the Everest was finally, Sarah and Hillary finally got on to the summit of Everest. So people were saying, well, Mallory they'd got there and were coming down. Jochen, what is your connection with Everest and Julie and this book? Explain a bit about your background.
Yeah, for me it was practically a eureka moment. I had known about the mystery of Mallory and Irvine since I was a child, and it was just naturally a fascinating, real mystery. And when I was 16, I read the first book that was ever written purely about Mallory and Irvine and their disappearance on Mount Everest. And when I read this book, I really had this perfect moment, this intuitive gut feeling, my God, this story is going to lead to something in my life. I didn't have a vision like, I'm going to solve this mystery, but I was absolutely certain that this would lead to something in my life, and in fact, it did.
So, Jochen, are you a mountain climber? I mean, is that what you do? I mean,
yes,
yeah, okay,
yes, I am. I have been climbing since my childhood, not to extreme levels, but I had considerable alpine experience. So the approach to the mystery came quite naturally, and it became nothing but the guideline in my life, and has been so ever since, right to this day.
Julie, did you want to take was it an interest in mountain climbing, or did you think I'm never going to go up there again with the famous, because I suppose the thing is, Mallory and Irvine are one of the great romantic couples. This is the 20s. This is the golden generation. Young men and women, although they're doing it kind of in disguise, are going up mountains. It's a huge boom across Europe, isn't it? And mountain climbing is, I suppose, what you could say, kite surfing is today, and people are pushing the limits at the point. So did you, Julie, want to sort of go up there, or did you want to do a bit of more research, as it were?
Absolutely no head for heights.
Right.
But I'm a very keen skier, so I love skiing. So I love being in the mountains. And I spent a lot of my childhood in North Wales, where Sandy grew up. So there was a strong connection to the mountains, but I have absolutely no intention of going scaling horrifically dangerous ice falls and heights like that. So Yes, I come at it from the point of view of family research, but with knowledge and passion for the outdoors.
So what is the genesis? What is the start, the spark, the chispa then for this particular book? Is it a phone call? Is it a discovery? Explain a little bit about Jochen, if you can, about what you found, or the phone call, or how did your friendship and how did this first discovery come to you, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I had been researching the mystery for 11 years, and then by a series of very fortunate circumstances, I became one of the instigators and one of the members of a search expedition to Mount Everest that discovered the body of George Mallory. And that was back in 1999, and that created a huge echo in the press worldwide, renewed the interest in the mystery. And in the course of this, in the aftermath of the 1999 discovery, Julie wrote the first biography of Sandy Irvine, and I came to know Julie.
Because the thing is, I remember this quite graphically, because the body, if was found, because nobody knows they were last seen, weren't they? The last glimpse through the clouds is of them ascending rather than coming down, and then that's why the mystery. And they're using bulky equipment, and then there's this photograph, quite graphic. I remember it must have been in Newsweek or Time, that dates me, of the body, and it's remarkably well preserved, presumably because it's the clothing is brilliantly preserved, and this is obviously Mallory. So that must have been quite a shock and quite a find. But Julie, presumably you didn't kind of want, if they found your great uncle, you didn't kind of want that sort of image to appear, splashed across the world media, I suppose.
No, and I'm going to. I was critical at the time, but I'm going to defend what happened in 1999, because there's no way the climbers who found Mallory's body could possibly have realised it would be one of the first truly viral press events. And I was quite clear that I knew the Mallory family quite well, and they found that difficult. And I think everybody understands that. There was no way that wasn't going to be traumatic. So I went on record to say I'd rather Sandy's body was not shown to the press until we'd actually seen the photographs. And then, of course, nothing happened. 25 years went by. We marked in 2024 the last sort of the anniversary of the centenary of their disappearance. And I said to my friend Rebecca Stevens, who Jochen also knows well, it's a wrap, nothing else to find. And then 3 months later, I get a phone call from Jimmy Chin, who was the director of Free Solo, quite a very famous Oscar-winning film. And he said, rather gingerly, I was on the Central Rombuk Glacier last month, and I found some old bits of kit. Anyway, long story short, I found a boot with a foot in it and a sock, and on the cuff of the sock there was a cashier's name tape, and it said A.C. Irvine. And I went, oh my God, you found my great uncle. And that was extraordinary. 3 days later, Jochen, he will tell you, also heard the story. And I gingerly, sort of late October 2024, put out a feeler to Jochen to say, how would you feel about, revisiting the mystery of Mallory and Irvine with this new evidence? And what did you say, Jochen?
I said, yes, I will do. Because I felt at that point, to be perfectly honest, I was at the point I thought, yeah, it really is a wrap. There's nothing to be found. But when Julie came with her offer, I reconsidered, and I was very convinced that the two of us, we could really take a fresh look, both at Sandy Irvine's life and at the mystery, because in fact, the discovery of Mallory didn't do much to solve the mystery. We didn't find a camera or film that actually proved that they had made the summit. Yeah. So Sandy Irvine became the carrier of the story, and it is now in retrospect only natural that the two of us would go and take a fresh look at him right now, because now, he is now the story of 1924.
Can I ask a very, very stupid question, because that is what I'm good at, and I get a nosebleed if I go on the top deck of a London bus, but we're talking Everest, and again, I have never been anywhere near there, but we kind of think from the reports that we get in the press, Everest is, and people make this, it's almost like a tourist resort, because like a theme park, because we see people going up with guides and all chained together. And this is going to be a stupid statement, Jochen, so please forgive me. Obviously, Everest is huge. It's obviously a massive place, and this is why it's not a case of there is one route up and, oh, look over there, there's a boot. Explain the sort of geography, what it's like, and so that was, and why A, Mallory's where you found Mallory, but B, why Sandy is so much more interesting as well. So just the size, please.
Well, Everest is a gigantic pyramid, three-sided, almost raising 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet from the glacier surrounding it. It is a big mountain, and it is still a very high mountain, no matter what you see in the press about the people using oxygen and jugging up fixed ropes. It was completely different in the 1920s, when they just had very rudimentary oxygen equipment, but incredible sense of daring and of adventure. Over the years, two routes, classic standard routes, developed. One from the Tibetan side, the side from where it was first attempted in the 1920s, and then the classic route from Nepal, Hillary and Tenzing's first ascent route. The matter of discovering Mallory and eventually Sandy Irvine was following the northern route from Tibet. And in 99, we had some evidence where Mallory or also Irvine might be found, and we followed that evidence to its conclusion. But the find of Sandy Irvine on the glacier at the foot of the mountain came somewhat as a surprise, because we had previously thought that he would have ended up high on the mountain as Mallory did. So this is still a good part of the mystery. How did Sandy end up on the central Rongbuk Glacier at the foot of the mountain? And still more research needs to be done.
But there's one interesting bit of scale. You asked about size. So Mallory's body and Sandy's body are between 5 and 6 linear miles apart.
Yeah.
So that's got to be nearly 10K. It's a huge distance.
And 7,000 feet in altitude difference.
Wow. Okay. So what's the relationship? Because obviously this is a story of brave young men going where no man has gone before with rudimentary oxygen and, thick woolen socks and good boots sort of thing. What was the relationship between the two men? Because it's, Mallory is always seen as the quintessential British hero, and with the greatest respect, sometimes sort of Sandy is seen as kind of tagging along, but that's obviously not fair, because a 2-man expedition is very, very important. So, yeah.
I think what is very much underestimated about Sandy Irvine was just how physically strong he was. He was a rower, and he was chosen specifically because the Mount Everest committee, who set up the 3 expeditions in the 1920s, had done their research, had come to the conclusion that they needed very experienced mountaineers to lead the trail, but they needed strong, fit young men to do the actual, to do some of the climbing. So in a way, he was exactly what the Mount Everest committee wanted. And although he had not got mountaineering experience, he was a very able sportsman. He was extraordinarily strong. He'd been to Spitsbergen, the Arctic island, the Norwegian Arctic island, in 1923, and had proved himself to be a really splendid, strong fellow who could, fix things. He was a Mr. Fix-It. You gave him a problem, a broken ski, a broken oxygen set, a damaged watch, he would fix that for you. So he had these 2 attributes. And I think Mallory very early on realised that the Mount Everest committee was on the right track looking for young, strong men. Here was one who he could climb with. And Mallory was not practical. That's not in any way an insult to him. He was simply not able to do the practical work. So a partnership with Sandy Irvine, which I think they developed in the idea really very early on the trek, was that Sandy would provide the strength and the brains to make Mallory's attempt as viable as possible.
Here's a quick question. How long was it planned? Does it take from where they're starting to get to the summit? That's point one. And two, are they not going up with Sherpas? They're not going up with Nepalese, or is it going to be a purely British thing? So how long does it take to get up? Are they planning to do it 3 days? Again, I know nothing, Jochen, about the size of the mountain. So how long are they thinking it will take them to get up and back down again?
Well, you have to differentiate between the expedition itself and the summit attempt. The expedition itself was a 2-month-long affair. It took 6 weeks to reach the mountain on foot from Darjeeling. They had local helpers and Sherpas, load carriers, the best of whom carried all the way to the high camp at 8,140 meters. And it was then estimated once the climbers had adapted to altitude, it would take 6 days from base camp. There were 4 camps up to the staging post, the North Col at around 7,000 meters, and then 2 more high camps, Camp 5 and Camp 6. And from Camp 6, Mallory and Irvine were to launch their summit bid. So that's the basic strategy for climbing the mountain.
Yeah, Julie.
Have a set of established camp, and then the climbers launch the summit bit.
And so at the lower camps, there are more people from the expedition, so they don't just head off on their own. Presumably, there are people waiting below. Should there be some sort of problem? I'm just thinking here.
So there were climbers in support. So the expedition was made up, as Jochen said, of a climbing party, of some Gurkha officers who ran the lower camps, of a very wonderful man called Edward Shabir, who was a transport officer, and a man called Geoffrey Bruce, who turned out to be an excellent climber, but was also in charge of the porters. So there was a big management structure. And the 2 most important camps, as people were setting off for the summit, were camps 3 and 4, which were high on the mountain. And so Sandy and Mallory had in Camp 4 a support team of a man called Noel Odell, who famously saw them very close to the summit, and a man called John Hazard, who was there, and they would be preparing food, helping them to get off in the morning up to the Camp 5 and Camp 6 with their porters. So it's not like they were completely alone until the very last day. On the 6th of June, when they set off on the 6th of June, on the 8th of June, from Camp 6, they were completely on their own, just the 2 of them. But that's the only time. Is that fair, Jochen?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the thing that also strikes me is the fact that, Jochen, you know this mountain, and the great thing about this book is you can bring your perspective to what these men were doing over, 100 years ago. I mean, are you amazed by their endurance, their bravery? Because obviously now going up Everest is still a huge and challenging task, and the equipment they're doing with, like I said before, it's basically thick wool or it's walking boots. It must be a tremendous, a tremendous feat to even attempt this. I mean, you must have thought when you're looking at this, these guys were either very, very brave or completely mad.
No, in fact, that's not what I was thinking, because in time, both while doing my research and then, of course, when writing this book with Julie, I came to really newly appreciate the actual intelligence of those early climbers. They were very, very good observers when it came to the conditions of high altitude, and a lot of clever thinking, intelligent thinking went into their planning. And that was maybe the greatest step in writing this new book, is this new appreciation of how well prepared they were, given what resources they had. Their clothing, it looks primitive at first glance, but in fact it wasn't. It was a very, very sophisticated layering system. The oxygen set was rudimentary, but Sandy Irvine did a lot to improve it, to make it lighter. And so they did the best they could under the given circumstances. And that is, it really gave sort of change in perspective working on this book.
Because that's what I was going to say, Julie. I mean, because otherwise we tend to think of the, great British public school boys who go off and, try and do the North Pole, the South Pole, climb this mountain, and they're all crazy army officers and they meet their fates. This changes, as Jochen says, this changes completely the narrative. They weren't, upper class, boys going off, men going off to do their thing. They were professionals in an age of if you like, of gentlemen climbers. And they knew what they were doing, and so this changes the whole way that we have been taught this.
They not only knew what they were doing, Giles, which is Jochen said is formidable and fascinating, and they'd prepared long before they even left Britain. There were climbing plans and so forth, but they also really understood the local environment. They had enormous respect for the porters and the Sherpas. Many of the men on the expedition spoke at least 2, if not 3 Himalayan languages. There was, of course, it's empire time. I'm sorry, you can't get away from that in the 1920s. But there was a real respect, especially in the leadership of the expedition, towards the men and women they'd recruited, men specifically, they'd recruited in Darjeeling and then in Tibet. And I really liked that. It was a very professional outfit. And yes, of course, they wanted to get to the top, but it wasn't gung-ho. And I think that's one of the things that working with Jochen has been so absolutely fascinating, is just to revisit Edward Norton, the expedition leader's notes, to think about how they planned, how Mallory planned that final climb. It's all there. The detail is all there. It's all beautifully thought through. And Jochen and I have had such fun drawing those threads out and then putting Sandy into the heart of this story, because that's where he belongs. And it's been an absolute pleasure. I
mean, how you say we're talking about planning the expedition, but planning this book must have been quite good fun, because you're obviously friends, but but working together, and we both, you have a theory about something, Jochen, or Julie, you have a theory, and then you kind of sort of pull them, like climbing Everest. This book is a work that is teamwork.
You go, Jochen, you tell us what it's like.
Yeah, it came down to some pretty basic core values: mutual respect and expertise. I mean, I knew that Julie had this wonderful connection to the family and this knowledge of Sandy Irvine's life. I brought in my expertise of the many years of research I did, and by clearly respecting each other's expertises, we could so easily combine them. And that was the pleasure of working on this book, that it was so easy to work together. And there were always this, we pushed ourselves to explore more corners of each other's realms, so to say, and that was just wonderful.
I think what was also such fun is actually writing together is a challenge, but unbelievably, not unbelievably, we write in a very similar way. Jochen has the most beautiful command of English. He writes magically, and it really sort of pushed me to be a little bit more lyrical in some of my writing, which was great fun. So we never let our sort of our creative spirit damage the facts, but there was some real moments when we just both thoroughly enjoyed the act of creating the prose. And I wrote the first half of the book roughly, and Jochen edited it, and he wrote the second half of the book roughly, not completely, and I edited that. So we managed to bring Sandy back into the story every time it got very factual about the research over the last 100 years. And Jochen's knowledge of Everest just brought the description of the trek across Tibet to life. It was wonderful. And I've never collaborated on a book before, and I'll never do it again, because it could never possibly be as much fun.
Here's the thing, because you talk about your great uncle, and he was never talked about. He was always this mythical figure. And if you like, you are putting him in his rightful place, right in the center of the story. As from a personal level, Julius, this is family history. This is something, I mean, now you must wish that people had talked about it, that there was some record about him from family, because you must have placed him firmly, because his last moments perhaps define him about what he was about, and you rediscover him.
That's very important, and I'm so glad you've made that point. Yes, it was really important to capture him, the man, through his childhood. And funnily enough, there was a lot more material within the family than I'd appreciated when I first approached it. So just a silly example, there were some letters between his two brothers in the 1970s that just showed how much and how little had been discussed about him after his death, but also the huge respect and affection he was held in. And then the other thing, of course, which is so valuable, was to go back to the letters of condolence that were written after his death. And Jochen, you read all of those too, didn't you? And it really brought home how much he'd meant to people, and that helped to sort of draw him out as a personality.
Jochen, what's it like? What's it like reading those letters? And also, you're but you're a mountain man. You climb. You're looking at the same mountain that these men were climbing. You've done it yourself. Do the same values still hold on? Do you still hold the same values? You recognise the same values that obviously that Irvine and Mallory had, the same love of the mountains?
That is another aspect of the book that I really want to subscribe to. Sandy Irvine makes the whole story of 1924 relatable. For a long time, it always looked at that story of days gone by 100 years ago. But Sandy Irvine was regarded as the future. And in fact, he has become that future, because so much in those letters, diary entries and so on, were feelings that I could so easily relate to when I was 22 and went to the mountains. There was this feeling of adventure, there's living for the moment, anything is possible. And Sandy keeps those feelings alive in me, and hopefully in our readers too. And that's one of probably this is the legacy of our book in years to come, that Sandy Irvine brings so much of this 1924 story alive and makes people realize, well, maybe nowadays some of us and some of those climbers aren't really that much different, and we are really standing on the shoulders of giants in as far as Mallory and Irvine are concerned. We are still living their dream and their legacy.
The book. If you write like you speak, Jochen, the book is called The Everest Mystery. I could talk to you all day, but about to go crash into our news. But listeners, go to our virtual bookstore, click on the book, it's being shown, and it will be winging its way to you. The book is called The Everest Mystery. It's by Julie Summers and Jochen Hammleb. If people want to find you online, Jochen, do you have a website, or can people find you online?
Plain and simple, my name, www.jochenhammleb.com.
And Julie, where can people...
Julie, it's the same.
Yeah. JulieSummers.co.uk.
Well, listen, you can order the book, and I urge you to order the book. It's a fascinating tale, and it will completely shatter your misconceptions about empire and young men and all that sort of stuff. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Julie Summers and Jochen Hammleb, authors of The Everest Mystery. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.